Before we start, let's revisit the major causes and effects of the Civil War. One of the major causes of the war was the North did not want slavery to expand to the West, and the South did want slavery to expand into the West. Another cause of the Civil War was that Southern states seceded from the Union and formed the Confederacy. President Lincoln tried to compromise and bring the South back into the Union peacefully, but his attempts failed. These two major issues brought about the Civil War, which was fought between 1861 and 1865. After the Civil War, the South was devastated both economically and socially. But the questions remained. How can the South be brought back into the Union, and is there a place for freed African Americans in society?
Following the Civil War, a period known as the Reconstruction began in 1865 and lasted until 1877. In 1865, President Lincoln proposed a plan to introduce the emancipation of amnesty. This meant that Lincoln was giving the South a second chance to turn over a new leaf and join the Union peacefully. As a result of this, a new group emerged. This group was called the Radical Republicans. Thaddeus Stevens led this group, and they did not want to reconcile with the South. This group, along with moderates, agreed on the Wade-Davis Bill. This bill said that adult white men in the former Confederate states were required to take an oath of allegiance to the Union. However, President Lincoln pocket vetoed it. This allowed Lincoln to block the bill, which also allowed Congress to expire without signing the legislation.
In 1865, Congress was promoted to establish a Bureau of Refugees and Freedmen, which was also called the Freedmen's Bureau. Also in 1865, the United States was devastated when President Lincoln was assassinated. Because of this, President Andrew Johnson took control during the Reconstruction period. He issued another proclamation of amnesty in the summer of 1865. This proclamation led the new Southern state legislators to pass laws known as the Black Codes. The Black Codes were laws that limited African Americans' rights in the South. The following year, the 14th Amendment was created in the fear that the Civil Rights Act would not pass. This caused acts of violence among people, such as a mob of white angry men attacked delegates in New Orleans that supported voting rights of the African Americans in 1866.
In 1867, the Military Reconstruction Act was introduced. This divided the former Confederacy into 5 military districts. Also during this year, the Tenure of Office Act was passed. This meant that all orders from the President had to go through the headquarters of the General of the Army. President Johnson did not uphold and approve this act, which led to his impeachment in 1868. After his impeachment, the 15th Amendment was passed, which declared that all people had the right to vote, including African Americans. This caused all of the former Confederate states to rejoin the Union by late 1870s. This further caused some Northerners to move to the South. These people were called carpetbaggers because of the suitcases they carried.
People living in the South that supported the Republicans as well as the Reconstruction were called scalawags. Also during this time, other people such as African Americans began to organize themselves politically. Southerners claimed that black republicanism now ruled the South. With much support from the white Southerners, the Republican Party took power. This made the South get rid of the Black Codes. At this time, the South began to rebuild itself by building hospitals, railroads, and bridges. African Americans also sought an education. By 1870, 4,000 schools and 9,000 teachers had taught 200,000 formerly enslaved people of all ages. Churches were also established, which brought many people together spiritually.
Also during this time, the Ku Klux Klan, also known as the KKK, formed. This was a secret society where Southerners openly showed prejudice without being challenged by the government. Members of the KKK terrorized the Republican Party, including African Americans. Their goal was to drive out the Union troops and regain control of the South. President Grant was elected during this time because he helped lead the North to victory in the Civil War. However, he had little political experience. His election helped divide the Republican Party. Along with the Radical Republicans, another Republican group was emerging at this time. The group was called Liberal Republicans, which were Republicans who agreed with the Democrats when it came to the topic of taxing. This new group nominated Horace Greeley to run against President Grant in the upcoming election. They did this so they could have someone representing their opinions, however, Grant still won. Shortly after this election, the Panic of 1873 took place. This was an economic crisis that began with a series of bad railroad investments. Because of this, the banking firm went bankrupt, which caused many businesses to shut down or go out of business.
The Democrats have more power in Congress now, so it has become harder for the Reconstruction policies that were made. The Democrats wanted to regain power of the South, even if it meant they had to play dirty. The Democrats stuffed the ballot boxes. These were called border ruffians. They also bribed the vote counters and intimidated the Republicans. This was complete racism because the Democrats wanted to stop the South from accepting black republicanism. Surprisingly, this worked because the Democrats won over many white Republican farmers. They did this by appealing to their racist side. By 1867, the Democrats had taken control of almost all of the South. These states were Louisiana, South Carolina, and Florida, which was where most of the African American voters were able to stay Republican. In the election of 1877, there were a lot of confusion as to who won. The election was between Hayes, a Republican, and Teton, a Democrat. The Democrats decided to side with the Republicans. This caused Hayes to win the election with a majority of the vote. With this, Hayes knew without the help of the Democrats he would not be in office, so he made the Compromise of 1877, which caused the Republican troops to be pulled out of the South when Hayes was elected. The original 3 states that were still under the Republican reign became Democratic. This was the end of the Reconstruction period.
The South realized that they could not return to their lifestyle to the way it was before the Civil War. Because of this, they decided to make the New South. Even after all of this, the North still helped the South build railroads. This was the start of the South's industrialization. However, the South still required the labor from African Americans, much like the Old South.